Here is Peter Mansbridge.
You know, as host of The National for 20 years, Peter Mansbridge has covered one major event after another.
Pig farming isn't an easy business. For one thing, it smells, and it smells a lot.
Oops, was the wrong clip. That, my friends, was Peter paying his dues as a young CBC reporter, and obviously it worked because Peter has gone on to cover the biggest stories in Canada and around the world. First as the Nationals Ottawa correspondent.
Pierre Trudeau has handed in his resignation.
Then in the role we all know him for, anchor and chief correspondent.
Tonight on The National.
Now, Peter got the big job in 1988, replacing Knowlton Nash. Since then, he's walked viewers through a lot, the fall of the Berlin Wall.
What a wild weekend it's been here.
The 95 Quebec referendum.
Canada is still here tonight, but just barely. Quebecers have voted no to sovereignty.
The 98 ice storm. Princess Diana's funeral. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And of course, the 9/11 attacks.
The task is enormous. The mood, grim.
Along the way, Peter has interviewed some of the world's most influential people. Bill Clinton, Margaret Thatcher, Bill Gates, Norman Jewison, and a whole lot more. Of course, in the news business, there's no off-season, and over the past few months, we've witnessed some historical moments. Our federal government nearly fell, Parliament was prorogued, the world is facing perhaps the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression, and the United States has an African-American president. Peter has been there to guide us all through it. Oh, and did I mention? He also scored an exclusive with Obama. Here's a clip.
Is Afghanistan still winnable?
Well, I think Afghanistan is still winnable in the sense of our ability to ensure that it is not a launching pad for attacks against North America.
Mr. Peter Mansbridge. You know, if you think about a couple of decades as being the anchor of the National, an awful lot can happen in the world, but just the last 6 months, 2 wars, an African-American president, a parliament was prorogued, a coalition was almost formed. It's incredible.
Never stops. I mean, that's the news business, right? But you're right, the last 6 months, even the last 10 years, it has come at such rapid fire pace. There's a new challenge all the time. Now we're in the midst of the biggest economic slump that any of us have seen or witnessed, or tried to figure out how to cover. I mean, it's an amazing story.
I wonder how you do cover this, especially because you know that you're going to have to cover it every night for a year, or at least a year.
Well, people are riveted by the story. That's the first thing we understood when, I guess it was about between the middle of September and middle of October where it really started. And people wanted all the information they could get. Why it was happening, what they should do with their money, what they should do with their investments. And so that's been incredibly challenging to us, but at the same time, you know, we ask ourselves, you know, are we contributing to it by, you know, highlighting the drop in the Dow every night and the TSX? But you can't ignore these things. Right. It's very challenging. You're dealing with, in so many cases, you know, people's jobs, people's lives.
I wonder too if you know, the role of a news program like yours has to change in times where it's not just here's what happened and here's what it meant, but it also becomes a how-to guide to a degree. You were just saying about what people should do with their money. Do you find yourself having to take on those sorts of jobs as well?
Yeah, we're doing that, you know, how to protect your job, how to protect your income, you know, what to do if you do have some money, what you should do if you have none. I mean, we're doing those kind of programs, and they're extremely popular right now. Same with your show. You're seeing that you're getting a spike in your audiences when you're dealing with this issue. I mean, let's face it, it's affecting everyone, and they want to hear as much as they can.
It's interesting. Could you ever have imagined even 15 years ago that, you know, 20 years and this is how busy the world would be? A prorogued government, you know, a coalition. When you woke up or you started to get wind of the coalition government in Canada, did you think someone was playing a prank?
Well, no. I mean, we knew it was very real. I've been around long enough that I remember December '79 when the Clark government fell, and that all came out of a threat at a Christmas party by the Liberals on a Wednesday night.
Photocopied their ass and said, "I'm bringing you down."
Yeah, exactly. Just about. I mean, there was a lot of booze flowing that night, and but there were some pretty wise Liberals who thought this was our opportunity and we can make it happen. Now, that story happened within a 24-hour period, and nobody was able to stop the train. The smartest thing Stephen Harper did last December was he stopped the train for a week. You know, if it had all happened in a 24-hour period, you know, he probably would have lost power if they'd had that vote right then. But he managed to delay things, stretch it out, bought it some time for a week, and then got the prorogation. How's that word said again?
You're Peter Mansbridge. However you say it, it's right.
I try to get around it, you know. Any of those big words come up on the prompter, to me, I sort of, you know, cough through it and move right on.
You also had a chance to deal with the world issue by talking to the new President Barack Obama. We'll come back and we'll talk about Obama with Peter Mansbridge, but also if he were to have a guilty pleasure newscast, what would it look like? More with Mansbridge after the break.
And we're clear.
All right, great. That was good. So we're in the middle of commercial break. We'll come back and do block 2. I think it's going pretty well so far.
Yeah, you're no Mansbridge.
Well, you're no Obama.
Touche.
There you go. Still ahead in the program tonight. The guys in Nickelback. There's their brand new song. Nice. Nickelback coming up in the hour. You just met them, right?
I did. I just met them in your green room. Big thrill.
Nice,
you know, for me. Wait till I tell my son. You know, I'm golden now.
Big thrill for you. They were probably panicking. They looked at you and went, Peter Mansbridge. You know, the first time I ever met you was at the Air Canada Centre during, it was Music Without Borders, and you introduced the Tragically Hip on stage.
Yeah.
And when you got on stage, you got a cheer about as big as any of the bands did that night. Do you ever get a sense of that, of who you are in this country?
They thought I was with the hip.
Hey, they brought the hit rodeo out.
That's right. Yeah, no, that was a big night. It was fun. It was a lot of fun.
Obama, you got the interview with Barack Obama,
Right.
which is a hell of a score. So good on you. What was that like? Those minutes with him?
It was great. I mean, you know, I only had 11 minutes as it turned out, 10 minutes, and they say 10 minutes, and you don't want to go over, right? Or they sort of drag out the big hook. Yeah. They had his helicopter literally hovering outside, waiting to pick him up.
No pressure on you.
No pressure. But he was, you know, the whole no drama Obama thing, it's real. I mean, he was very cool. You know, he came in the room, he was nice to everybody, relaxed, wasn't in a hurry to leave. When he came in, he sort of rounded the corner, you saw it on that clip, came off the hallway and in, and he comes walking over, he goes, Peter, how are you? Like this, and I'm going, hey. He knows me. But I realized that the last thing that had been whispered to him as he rounded that corner was, Peter. Yeah, the guy's name's Peter, right?
I suspect he knew who you were. He granted you the interview for a reason, right?
I'll tell you what he did know. He knew the file.
Canada.
Yeah, he knew, I mean, we got quite a bit into a short period of time, but he was comfortable on every level that we asked questions on. He tried to duck some, you know, and you follow him up. But he was good.
You get the sense that the wave of emotion that helped carry Obama into office, which is felt by a lot of the people in the media, that he ducks an awful lot of questions and doesn't get an awful lot of follow-up. And he seems to be enjoying the kind of honeymoon period that I don't think I've seen in a long time for a world leader.
Yeah, well, it's only been a month or so, you know.
But he's still getting quite a blast.
He does, but you know, he's going to have to deliver at some point. I mean, I remember when I was on here.
You predicted
here. What, a year ago, January. I thought that he had a real good shot at it, but at some point he was going to have to explain what hope and change were, right?
That's right.
But he managed to actually get through the whole year without ever doing that, which was pretty good. Now he's got to deliver on the economy because people are hurting. And they're looking for him to save them, which is an incredible task. It's not what he banked on even 6 months ago that he was going to be left with.
It might not even be the domain of a president because, you know, he delivers a speech and the markets tank. The Prime Minister in Canada does something and it tanks. It's almost as if they can't do that much aside from try to spend their way. So,
yeah, they got to look to somebody, you know, and they're looking to him. And, you know, you can see him trying to caution them through every speech. This is going to take time. But he needs some victories, and you know he will need that. But right now he is certainly riding on air. There's no doubt about it, and you can feel it around him. You know, it was a nice moment. We worked hard to get that interview for a long time. A couple of our producers, Samira Hussein in Washington, Leslie Stojic here, we worked on that for almost a year and a half. Well, before the primary season even started, we were trying to get him.
But one of the things you
finally
talked about
delivered.
was the war in Afghanistan. Your question, was it winnable? His answer was long-winded, but no. It felt like it anyway.
Basically, his answer was kind of a forerunner of what we've heard Harper saying the last few days.
Right.
Some things about this are not going to be winnable. But the thing is to try and put in a government in place that's going to have certain fundamental philosophies that are the same as Ottawa and Washington's. They're not there yet. I mean, there's all kinds of problems there, as we all unfortunately know.
Yeah, like you said, Harper's starting to talk that way now, speak that way. Do you think that Stephen Harper has sort of settled into this role now because he has to be the guy that deals with the president again, and now that he's seemingly quieted down the House for a while?
Yeah, except it's funny, I just in the last couple of days, that old streak of his partisan nature has come back, and he's taunting the opposition, which can only mean one thing. They're showing him internal polls that say, hey, everything's going good. Yeah. But it's when he goes like this that things sometimes seem to have soured on him in the past. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. I was thinking in the last few weeks that we're probably in for a run at least through this year before another election, but who knows, right? Who knows?
Michael Ignatieff, you've covered a lot of Liberal leaders in your career, and they used to say that if you were the Liberal leader, there was a really good chance you were going to be the Prime Minister. Yeah. What do you think of the current state?
Well, he hasn't been in an election yet, so we'll see what happens. He changes the dynamic somewhat. There's no doubt about that. I mean, Dion is one of only a few, if not the only person who has been leader of the Liberal Party and not been Prime Minister. So, it's Ignatieff's odds that way are good, but Harper's won a number of times now already, but he doesn't have his majority. We're in interesting times.
I wonder if Canada's changed. I mean, we know that the dynamic has changed and the population has changed, but if Ottawa still runs one way and the Canadian people have changed around them and they haven't quite caught up to who we are now and what this current makeup is of the country.
Well, the makeup of the country's constantly changing, and because of the system we have, you have governments that can attain power and even have a majority government put into power with less than 40% of the vote. You can have an awful lot of people who don't like you,
and you're the boss.
And you're the boss. And you can be a majority Prime Minister.
Incredible. Let's just say, I mean, it's clear your credibility is intact. I think you've got the job. That's fine. But if one day Peter Mansbridge got to program the National, your credibility wouldn't be an issue, ratings would be fine, people would watch it. What would be your guilty pleasure newscast? What would be the top two stories? Sure. Because I remember that you used to call me when I worked at Much Music, and you'd be like, nice story about Britney, and then you'd laugh at me on a voicemail. So I wondered, and I'd be like, oh, you're doing your news, and I'm doing my news, but whatever. But what would the Peter Mansbridge guilty pleasure news be like?
Leafs win.
So then your second story would be they found unicorns then, right? Is that what it would...
Something like that. I can tell you what the show I'd really like to be able to do someday, because the criticism we get all the time is that the show's too negative. We only deal with bad news. Now, we don't only deal with bad news, but I understand where that comes from.
Sure.
But you'd love to be able to go on the air one night and say, good evening, they've found the cure for what, you fill in the blank.
Yeah.
That's the day you want to be around for.
Have you had those moments in your career where you just cannot wait to go on the air and tell this story?
Oh yeah, lots of times. Yeah. It's a great job because you're dealing with different issues every day. You're meeting different people every day. You're learning all the time. You never stop learning. I mean, I'm not a specialist in anything, but I'm a generalist. I learn a little bit about a lot of things. And that's fun. You never get bored. I mean, look, I met Nickelback today.
Hey, how's your son doing in hockey? Well, he plays, right? You mentioned hockey.
2 goals, 3 assists on the last game on Saturday. He plays D. He's a good little hockey player.
An offensive defenseman.
He is.
Are you the hockey dad who sits and yells at the referee? Because I imagine Mansbridge yelling at the ref when you're just, are you that guy?
I'm one of the coaches.
Oh, so that's a yes. The National weeknights at 10 p.m. on CBC. It's good to see you, man. Thanks for coming. Peter Mansbridge, everybody. everybody. We'll be right back. As you mentioned, Nickelback. And the United States has an African-American president. Peter has been there to guide us all through it. Oh, and did I mention? He also scored an exclusive with Obama. Here's a clip.
Is Afghanistan still winnable?
Well, I think Afghanistan is still winnable in the sense of our ability to ensure that it is not a launching pad for attacks against.
1988 replacing Knowlton Nash. Since then, he's walked viewers through a lot. The fall of the Berlin Wall.
What a wild weekend it's been here.
The 95 Quebec referendum.
Canada is still here tonight, but just barely. Quebecers have voted no to sovereignty.
The 98 ice storm. Princess Diana's funeral. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And of course, the 9/11 attacks.
The what?
Oops, was the wrong clip. That, my friends, was Peter paying his dues as a young CBC reporter, and obviously it worked because Peter has gone on to cover the biggest stories in Canada and around the world. First as the Nationals Ottawa correspondent.
Pierre Trudeau has handed in his resignation.
Then in the role we all know him for, anchor and chief correspondent.
Tonight on The National.
Now, Peter got the big job in
Here is Peter Mansbridge.
You know, as host of The National for 20 years, Peter Mansbridge has covered one major event after another.
Pig farming isn't an easy business. For one thing, it smells, and it smells.
The task is enormous. The mood, grim.
Along the way, Peter has interviewed some of the world's most influential people. Bill Clinton, Margaret Thatcher, Bill Gates, Norman Jewison, and a whole lot more. Of course, in the news business, there's no off season, and over the past few months, we've witnessed some historical moments. Our federal government nearly fell, Parliament was prorogued, the world is facing perhaps the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression.